Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the epic, 2 millennia story of the Arab world since the time of Christ. For 2,000 years, this region's political, military, and cultural center of gravity has been in constant, restless motion. We're going to trace the journey of an entire civilization from scattered desert tribes to a global powerhouse, watching as the ultimate seat of power migrates thousands of miles across different continents, entirely driven by rapid conquests, intellectual revolutions, and massive economic shifts.
Because we're covering a massive amount of history today. Here's our roadmap. We'll be moving through 6 distinct eras defined by their capital cities: the rise of Mecca, Damascus and the Umayyads, the Golden Age in Baghdad, Cairo and the Mamluks, the Ottoman Empire, and finally, the rise of the modern Emirates. Section 1. The Rise of Mecca. From scattered tribes to a unified Arabian Peninsula.
Think back to before the 7th century. The geopolitical center of the world was entirely dominated by the Christian Byzantine Empire to the northwest and the Zoroastrian Sassanid Persian Empire to the northeast. Down in the Arabian Peninsula, it was a totally different story. It was largely a fragmented, decentralized collection of Bedouin tribes navigating trade routes and scattered settlements, places like Mecca and Yathrib, which we now know as Medina. But in the early 600s, that all flips. Everything changes with the birth of a new religion, Islam, which unifies these previously scattered tribes under a single, incredibly powerful political and religious banner, centered right there in Mecca and Medina.
Now, when you suddenly create a massive new entity like this, you immediately face a structural challenge. Who's in charge? Following Prophet Muhammad's death in 632 AD, Abu Bakr became the first caliph. This essentially meant he was the designated successor, holding supreme political, military, and religious authority all at once. And Abu Bakr established a governance model that didn't just sit still. It immediately pivoted from internal unification to explosive external expansion. He quelled local upheavals and then boldly declared war on the surrounding heavyweights, the Roman or Byzantine and Persian empires. But this new centralized power had a massive, critical flaw built right into it, and that was succession. As the historian al-Shahrastani famously noted, never was there an Islamic issue which brought about more bloodshed than the caliphate. Deciding who actually got to wield this ultimate power was fiercely debated. Do you choose a leader based on electoral tribal seniority or by direct blood relation to the prophet? That fundamental disagreement set the stage for devastating civil wars known as the Fitnas, and ultimately it triggered the first major outward shift of the capital away from the Arabian Peninsula. Which brings us to Section 2, Damascus and the Umayyads. Conflict as a catalyst for a new dynastic empire. Just look at the sheer, unbelievable speed of this early Islamic conquest. In 636 AD, they defeated the Byzantine army at the Battle of Yarmouk. The very next year, 637 AD, they completely crushed the Sassanid Persian Empire at Qadisiyah. By 638 AD, they had conquered Jerusalem. Let that sink in. They dismantled 2 ancient superpowers in the time it takes most people to finish a college degree. In just 3 years, a completely new military force had literally rewritten the map of the Middle East, setting off a wave that swept into Syria, Egypt, and eventually all the way across North Africa into Spain.
But here's the thing. As your territory expands massively, your governance simply has to adapt. You can't run a sprawling intercontinental empire the exact same way you run a localized desert confederation, right? So the old system, the one based on electoral seniority and companionship, was entirely thrown out in 661 AD. The Umayyad family seized control, established a strict hereditary, dynastic imperial rule, and crucially, they moved the capital to Damascus, in Syria. Damascus was a sophisticated, ancient city. It was just vastly better positioned, geographically and administratively, to manage this giant new Mediterranean and Near Eastern empire.
Moving on to Section 3, the Golden Age in Baghdad, the Abbasid Revolution and intellectual flourishing.
Then 750 AD hits, and boom, another massive structural shift. The Abbasid revolution violently overthrows the Umayyads, and they move the center of power eastward into Iraq, building the entirely new city of Baghdad. Now, while Damascus was all about rapid territorial expansion and administration, Baghdad became something entirely different. It became the epicenter of the Islamic Golden Age. The Abbasids established the legendary House of Wisdom around 810 AD. Here, scholars were translating ancient Greek and Indian texts into Arabic, pioneering algebra, chemistry, and astronomy. Later on, as power began to fracture, the Fatimid Caliphate over in Cairo built a rival house of knowledge, which was said to hold over 1.6 million books. The center of gravity, you see, wasn't just political or military anymore. It was highly intellectual.
Sadly, this magnificent era in Baghdad met a brutal, catastrophic end. In 1258 AD, the Mongol prince Hulagu, Genghis Khan's grandson, sacked the city. The destruction was absolute. They utterly destroyed the House of Wisdom. Legend has it the rivers ran black with the ink of countless destroyed manuscripts and red with the blood of the scholars. This horrific event was a major turning point. It completely shattered the eastern power base of the Arab world, plunged the region into chaos, and forced the center of power to shift once again, this time migrating westward toward North Africa.
This leads us to Section 4, Cairo and the Mamluks, defending the Levant from a new Egyptian stronghold. With Baghdad in ruins, Egypt emerged as the ultimate survivor. Decades before Baghdad even fell, back in 1171, Saladin had brilliantly unified Egypt and Syria. By 1250, a really unique military caste known as the Mamluks took control of Cairo, and their absolute defining moment came 10 years later, in 1260, at the Battle of Ain Jalut. The Mamluk general Baybars did what literally no one else could do. He decisively halted the Mongol invasion in its tracks. By defeating the Mongols, the Mamluks didn't just save the remaining Islamic world from total annihilation, they cemented Cairo as the undisputed political and cultural heavyweight for the next 2.5 centuries.
Section 5, the Ottoman Empire, Turkish dominance from Istanbul to Algiers.
Mamluk supremacy was strong, but in the early 16th century, a new, non-Arab power sweeps through, and the board changes instantly. In 1516, the Ottomans defeat the Mamluks and annex Syria. Just 1 year later, 1517, they conquer Egypt, and by 1534, they capture Baghdad. Within just a few decades, the Turkish Ottoman Empire swallowed up every single previous historic Arab capital we've discussed: Damascus, Cairo, Baghdad, all of them. The ultimate seat of governance was actually moved out of the Arab world entirely, relocating to Istanbul. For the next 400 years, the Arab world was largely administered as a series of provinces within this massive Ottoman bureaucracy.
But of course, even vast empires eventually fracture. By the 19th century, Ottoman control began falling apart in 3 distinct steps. First, European imperial powers started chipping away at the edges. The French occupied Algeria in the 1830s, and the British took the vital port of Aden. Second, internal local leaders, most notably Mehmet Ali down in Egypt, began carving out their own autonomous modernized states independent of Istanbul. And finally, by the late 19th and early 20th centuries, this all culminated in the complete dismemberment of Ottoman control, which was replaced by European protectorates and mandates. This incredibly messy transition drastically redrew the borders of the Middle East into the modern nation-states we recognize today.
Which brings us to our final era. Section 6, Rise of Modern Emirates. Independence, oil, and the dramatic shift back to the Gulf.
Spurred by massive mid-20th century resource discoveries, we see another monumental pivot. The coastal Gulf states evolved at lightning speed. Back in 1820, they were basically just British protectorates known as the Trucial States. But look at the milestones. 1947, oil development kicks off in Qatar. Throughout the 1950s, rapid economic development totally transforms the Eastern Arab lands. And by the 2000s, with massive initiatives like the launch of Dubai International Capital in 2004, these states transitioned into absolute global economic hubs. The wealth, diplomatic power, and cultural influence decisively shifted away from the historic capitals of the Levant and North Africa, heading straight back to the Gulf states and the Arabian Peninsula. Literally right back to where our story started 2,000 years ago.
So, what is the big takeaway here? It's that geography is not always destiny. Adaptability is. We have watched the center of power migrate from the religious unification in Mecca to the imperial administration in Damascus, the incredible intellectual heights of Baghdad, the military resilience of Cairo, the massive bureaucracy of Istanbul, and finally to the stunning economic dynamism of the modern Gulf. As you reflect on these sweeping territorial transitions, I want to leave you with this to ask yourself. Based on the undeniable patterns of the last 2 millennia, where is the center of gravity heading next? Thank you for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history that shapes our world today.